لا نريد أن تتطور لا في الجولان ولا في سوريا.
وقد وقعنا مرغمين كما يقال في مأزق أبغض الحياة.
Good afternoon. It is Wednesday, June 5th. I'm Yuna Naufal, and these are today's headlines. The Syrian army regains control of the strategic city of Qusayd on the border with Lebanon, according to rebels and state television. Reactions pour in after Britain and France say there is clear evidence that the Syrian government used the nerve agent sarin on several occasions. And Syrian regime forces carry out an air raid on the northeastern town of Asael in Lebanon. Syria's rebels have conceded they have lost the battle for the strategic town of Qusayd, but vowed to fight thousands of Lebanese mercenaries after the army seized total control of it and the surrounding region. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says fighters from Hezbollah, who had spearheaded the regime's assault, are in control now of Qusayd. Control of Qusayd was vital for the rebels as it was their principal transit point for weapons and fighters from Lebanon. It is also strategic for the regime because it is located on the road linking Damascus with the coast. Yes, our brothers, this is a round that we have lost, the General Commission of the Syrian Revolution said on its Facebook page, but rebels seeking to oust President Bashar al-Assad will continue to fight the Lebanese and the thousands of mercenaries. That was in direct reference to Hezbollah. Official news agency Sana said the army had re-established total security in the town of Qusayd, while Hezbollah's Al-Manar television, which has a correspondent on the ground, said the rebels had fled north toward the nearby villages of Dab'a and Buwaidi al-Shar'iyya. The United States wants to gather and review more evidence about the use of chemical weapons in Syria before making decisions about how to respond, according to White House spokesperson Jay Carney. This comes after Britain and France said they were certain that the nerve agent sarin had been used in Syria on several occasions following tests it carried out on samples recovered there.
Works very closely with the French, as well as other allies, as well as the Syrian opposition, to build on the information that we had developed about the likely use of chemical weapons in Syria. And we continue to work with the French and the British and others and the Syrian opposition to do that. I would note that the French report that you're citing says that more work needs to be done to establish who is responsible for the use and the amount that was used and more details about the circumstances around it. We are deeply concerned by the continued fighting in Qusayd and condemn the indiscriminate killing of civilians by Assad's forces and his proxies, including Hezbollah fighters. The regime's siege of Qusayd has created a dire humanitarian situation with severe shortages of food, water, and medicine. We are appalled by the regime's statement that they will not allow the International Committee of the Red Cross to enter Qusayd to aid trapped civilians until its military operations are completed. We call upon the Syrian government to cease its siege and its attacks on civilians, to allow civilians to escape Qusayd without the threat of violence, and to allow immediate and unimpeded access for all humanitarian actors and supplies into Qusayd. We are also concerned about the spillover violence into Lebanon, which we've discussed in the past, and which highlights the risk of regional instability from Hezbollah's intervention on behalf of the Assad regime. An intervention both Hassan Nasrallah and Bashar al-Assad have acknowledged publicly. Hassan Nasrallah is risking Lebanon's stability and the security of the Lebanese people in order to preserve Bashar al-Assad's rule, and we condemn in the strongest terms the active role Hezbollah has taken in the fighting on behalf of the Assad regime. We reaffirm our support for Lebanon's policy of disassociation from the conflict in Syria and urge all parties to avoid actions that will involve the Lebanese people in the conflict.
U.S., Russian, and UN diplomats gathered in Geneva to plan a new international conference aimed at ending the conflict in Syria as the regime scored a major victory by taking the strategic town of Qusayd. Joining UN peace envoy to Syria, Lakhdar Brahimi, at the table were Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Bogdanov and U.S. Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs Wendy Sherman. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov agreed last month to push for the conference, which is meant to follow up on an initial Geneva meeting last June that produced a never-implemented power transition plan for Syria. Washington and Moscow have pledged to work in tandem to bring the Syrian regime and the opposition together for the first time and try to negotiate a political transition to end the war that has left some 94,000 people dead. Syrian regime forces carried out an air raid on the northeastern town of Absel with a report saying that warplanes targeted a house owned by a man from Al-Hujayri family. The attack drew the condemnation of President Michel Sleiman, who urged Syria to respect Lebanon's sovereignty and not endanger its citizens. Voice of Lebanon Radio said that 2 rockets targeted the house, but only 1 exploded. The raid did not cause any casualties. Other border areas in the north and east have also been struck by frequent cross-border shelling and clashes, while the Syrian regime has told Lebanon to better control its porous border to prevent the smuggling of fighters and arms. Syrian tanks shelled also the outskirts of the northern border town of Abudiye overnight. A security source said a number of tank shells fired from Syrian territory shortly after midnight landed on the fringes of Abudiye, damaging several homes but causing no casualties. Prime Minister-designate Tamam Salam says that all parties should exert efforts to facilitate the formation of his cabinet. The delay in the formation is caused by the constitutional challenge, Salam's visitors quoted him as saying. They pointed out that Salam is keen to form a cabinet that represents the nation's best interest and has the consent of all rival parties. Salam also warned that the economic situation has reached alarming levels. The PM-designate's efforts to form a new government came to a halt in recent weeks in light of the dispute over the extension of Parliament's mandate and the political power's failure to reach an agreement over a new parliamentary electoral law. Salam will launch new consultations with various political powers to garner their views over the new government after the legislature extended its term for 17 months. Bulgaria says it only has an indication that Lebanon's Hezbollah might have been behind a deadly bus bombing in July of last year, and that this alone did not justify any European Union move to list it as a terrorist group. The new socialist-led government backed away from charges by its center-right predecessor that the group had carried out the attack that killed 5 Israelis and their Bulgarian bus driver in the Black Sea city of Burgas. Hezbollah has denied any involvement in the Burgas bombing. A British request to blacklist Hezbollah ran into opposition in the EU on Tuesday, with several governments voicing concern that doing this would increase instability in the Middle East. Some diplomats have said that such a move would complicate the EU's contact with Lebanon, where Hezbollah is part of the coalition government, and could increase turmoil in a country already suffering a spillover of civil war from Syria. Coming up next, Michael Douglas says that throat cancer can be caused by performing oral sex on a woman who has a sexually transmitted disease, what the doctors are saying when we return. A group representing Turkey's protesters urged the government to fire the police chiefs of Istanbul and Ankara and other cities where security forces have violently cracked down on political protests. Protesters camped out in Istanbul's Gezi Park remained defiant and were not hopeful of a meeting with Deputy Prime Minister Bülent Arınç as clashes continued across Turkey. Arınç was due to meet with the organizers of the original demonstration against plans to build a replica Ottoman-era barracks in Taksim Square, but he refuses to talk to unnamed groups he accuses of exploiting the situation to foment violence. The clashes between protesters and police continued in other parts of the country overnight, despite an apology for police violence from Arınç on Tuesday, which was designed to halt an unprecedented wave of protests against Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan. China and Russia are set to join 4 Western powers in voicing deep concern about Iran's atomic activities this week and pressing it to cooperate with the stalled inquiry by the United Nations nuclear watchdog. A draft statement by the 6 world powers expected to be delivered at a meeting this week of the 35-nation board of the International Atomic Energy Agency said it is essential and urgent for Iran to engage with the IAEA. The statement, which diplomats said had yet to be formally approved by all the 6 capitals, appeared intended to signal continued big power unity in a decade-old dispute over Iran's nuclear program. Tens of thousands of Shia Muslims pilgrims thronged a shrine in Baghdad for a ritual mourning ceremony amid the surge in violence that has sparked fears of a new all-out sectarian war. Security forces effectively shut down much of Baghdad, closing off major roads and limiting what cars could be on the streets to protect against attacks after nationwide violence rose last month to its highest level since 2008. Pilgrims from across the capital and the country descended on the shrine dedicated to a revered Shia figure for commemoration ceremonies that were to culminate on Wednesday in the northern neighborhood of Khadmiya. Mourners were to carry out the shrine a symbolic coffin marking the 799 AD death of Imam Musa Khadim, the 7th of 12 revered imams who is said to have been poisoned. Now for news around the world in brief. A fire broke out in Moscow's metro, the second to plague the city's underground transport system within a matter of hours. The fire, which landed 11 people in the hospital, 3 of them in emergency care, started underground in the city center, filing tunnels with smoke and halting metro transportation on Moscow's Red Line. The outbreak occurred in the same region where hours earlier another fire caused a mass evacuation and sent 7 people to the hospital. Indian police investigating the gang rape of a U.S. tourist by a group of truckers said they had identified the type of vehicle used in the attack and collected forensic evidence. The 30-year-old American hitched a lift in the truck on Monday night in Manali, a tourist destination in the foothills of the Himalayas, after struggling to find a taxi to return to her hotel. The incident follows the alleged rape of a 21-year-old Irish charity worker in the eastern city of Kolkata at the weekend and comes as India tries to fight widespread sex crime with tougher laws. At least 12 people have been killed in Central Europe as floodwater inundates large areas of Germany, Poland, Austria, Switzerland, and the Czech Republic. Thousands of soldiers have been deployed to help towns and cities in the flood-hit region. Several others remain missing after torrential rains and floodwater that peaked in Prague, the Czech capital, was heading towards Germany. Chancellor Angela Merkel pledged $130 million in emergency aid for flood-ravaged areas of Germany as the swelling waters forced thousands of people from their homes. A representative for actor Michael Douglas now says the actor does not blame his throat cancer on oral sex. The Guardian newspaper published an interview saying that Douglas did attribute his illness to the HPV virus from oral sex, but Douglas' comments came after throat cancer have thrown a spotlight on cancer risks from a sexually spread virus. In the United States, the American Cancer Society estimates there will be nearly 14,000 new cases of upper throat cancer this year. Studies suggest that HPV can be blamed for 60 to 80% of those cancers. Researchers say women sometimes get oral cancer caused by HPV, but the risk is greatest and rising among men. Dr. Posner confirmed the belief that men are at a greater risk than women.
The HPV virus is directly causative of oropharyngeal carcinoma. The virus has a biology that drives the cancer. Pharynx cancer is primarily a men's disease. 75% of the cases of oropharyngeal carcinoma occur in men that are related to this virus as opposed to women. So women probably have a separate or different immunologic state as a result of how they get infected. There is clearly a relationship between number of sexual partners and development of the cancer. That may not be a direct relationship between the infection and development of the cancer. It may be related to the exposure to other viruses, inflammation within the oral cavity or oropharynx as a result of multiple sexual partners. So promiscuity is a risk factor.
A very common virus, one responsible for the vast majority of cervical cancers, is now identified as a cause of this rapid rise in oral cancers. So please, the next time you visit your dentist or your medical doctor, ask for this simple screening. Finding oral cancer in its earliest stages may save your life.
Marks the end of our bulletin for today. Let me remind you of our headlines. The Syrian army regains control of the strategic city of Qusaid on the border with Lebanon, according to the rebels and state television. Reactions pour in after Britain and France say there is clear evidence that the Syrian government used the nerve agent sarin on several occasions. And Syrian regime forces carried out air raid on the northeastern town of Adsail in the country. Those are your Wednesday headlines live on Future Television in Beirut. I'm Yumna Nofal. Linda Tamim is back tomorrow at 4:20 for all the latest. Have a good night.
وقد وقعنا مرغمين كما يقال في مأزق أبغض الحياة.